Okay, hello everybody. I think it's about time to get started. My watch says 45. The clock I see back there is 47. So either way, I think it's about time for us to get going. Thank you all for coming to this session on 24/7 carbon-free energy. I'm Steve Dahlke with the Electric Power Research Institute. I admit I'm a little intimidated coming here today on this topic because a lot of the folks who invented this stuff are in the room. But as I was looking in the mirror this morning, I reminded myself that there are also some other folks here as well who might be interested in learning more about this. I'm happy to give an overview, and I'm happy to give my perspective on this topic. And I know that there's going to be some good expert practitioners following up in ensuing sessions going even deeper. So thank you again for coming. The Electric Power Research Institute, we're just a really quick background, a nonprofit scientific research organization focused largely on the electric sector, broadly speaking. So most topics related to electricity, we have folks researching them. There's about 2,000 of us employed at the Institute, folks in Europe and the United States, and some spread globally as well. My group within EPRI is called Energy Systems and Climate Analysis. We develop and apply electricity system models largely to long-term planning problems to help do things like look at utility investment plans, look at the impact of decarbonization strategies for particular utilities or regions or countries, look at proposed or recent policies, and that sort of thing. And we also have a contingent with some experience and expertise in greenhouse gas accounting and related issues. Within EPRI, we have a group called Technology Innovation, which we call TI, and their job is to keep an eye on the electric landscape and identify emerging and potentially new and game-changing concepts within the electric sector. We have internal and external advisors who help us identify what these things are. And last year, TI commissioned this white paper that we put together, led by my colleague Adam Diamant, myself, as well as a handful of other subject matter experts within EPRI lent some perspective as well. And so a lot of the overviews and some of the insights that I'll mention today stem from this effort. Our research methods here, we're largely just talking to a lot of folks in the space, some folks here in the room we connected with, and looking at a lot of primary and secondary sources. So it's a high-level overview, no deep modeling for this effort, but this is kind of our first foray into understanding 24/7 carbon-free energy. So what is 24/7 CFE? I think at its core, at a very high level at least, 24/7 carbon-free energy is a new energy procurement strategy for decarbonized electricity sources that is aiming to more granularly match variable energy supply with a particular customer's consumption pattern. So that granularity in time, and as well as thinking about spatial aspects, I think are key to 24/7 CFE. But the first bullet point up here is that there's no widely agreed upon definition of CFE. I think some of the variation and implementation we see could come from consumers' varying preferences for particular sources of decarbonized energy supply. So while one consumer might be focused on putting together a 24/7 CFE deal, they may be mostly interested in just wind and solar and perhaps batteries. Others may be less strict in those preferences and be okay looking at decarbonized sources from hydro and nuclear, for example, and mixes in between those two. But the United States federal government put together a definition for 24/7 CFE as it applies to their federal agencies in an executive order back in 2021, focused on decarbonizing federal agencies' energy consumption. And their definition is here in the middle right bullet, which is 24/7 carbon pollution-free electricity is electricity procured to match actual electricity consumption on an hourly basis and produced within the same regional grid where the energy is consumed. So while there's some kind of ambiguity within particular sources, additionality versus existing sources, I think this kind of captures some of the key aspects of broadly speaking, what folks are trying to get to with 24/7 CFE. And the federal government, all of the federal agencies within the United States, which is a particularly large electricity consumer across the country, they have a goal of achieving 50% carbon-free electricity on a 24/7 basis by 2030. So the key drivers for 24/7 CFE, I think early on, really came from a few large end users of electricity, data center folks, Google, Microsoft, another data center company called Iron Mountain, or some of the first movers in putting together these kinds of deals, really as a next step in their decarbonization strategy and energy procurement approach around reducing Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of folks who are aiming for renewable energy goals in their energy procurement do this on an annual accounting basis, which doesn't necessarily get to the interannual variation in renewable energy supply. So some of these forward-thinking consumers moved to this concept and started thinking about, okay, let's actually put together some deals and some products and some supply where we're really paying attention to how well are we actually matching this stuff on an hourly basis throughout the year. Excuse me. And then some power suppliers, some kind of early movers, developed products and strategies to meet those goals or those preferences from these particular consumers, and putting together a few early 24/7 carbon-free energy deals. So I mentioned this is best. It's good to think of this as an evolution in corporate renewable energy procurement. This chart shows that there's been a good chunk of renewable energy globally that's been procured recently from corporate energy demand. Corporations, largely voluntary commitments to achieving renewable energy targets, a lot of them with 100% renewable energy goals. And this has driven a lot of new renewables being installed on the grid. And a lot of this is through this annual accounting paradigm from which they are motivated to use these renewable energy procurements to reduce their annual Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions. And this is just a chart that I'm not going to spend too much time on, but it shows kind of some of the reasoning behind moving from that annual procurement paradigm towards a 24/7 approach, because of difference between what is known as a market-based emissions factor approach and location-based emissions accounting. So just at a very high level, if you're a corporate energy customer, you can achieve 100% renewable energy by signing power purchase agreements to get enough energy from your renewable facilities to match the amount of energy you consume on an annual basis. So in this case, in our simple example, the customer has 876 gigawatt hours of total energy. So if they sign PPAs for 876 gigawatt hours of renewable energy annually, they can claim 100% renewable energy. This doesn't account for the fact that there's going to be periods throughout the year where the renewable energy that they're procuring is supplying more energy than they're consuming at any given time of day or time of the year. That excess energy is being fed into the grid and spread across all the consumers. And there's other times when they are consuming energy maybe at night where their solar isn't producing, and they're pulling electricity from the grid that at times when their renewable energy plants aren't generating, and so they're relying on other sources of electricity. So a market-based approach, you can get to zero emissions through 100% renewable energy strategy. A location-based emissions factor, which takes kind of an average grid view, can deviate from that. Here's a chart that AES, an independent power producer, put together on 24/7 CFE, just kind of showing that very simply with an example day. If you're consuming energy, you can have 100% solar, but you're still consuming during periods when the sun's not shining. Perhaps that's quite obvious to folks. And here's one more chart that they put together showing, I like this because it shows kind of the benefits of a portfolio of renewable sources can help you achieve higher decarbonization than just simple either 100% wind or 100% solar. So real quick, if you start with just the grid and you take an hourly view, you can get to 39% in this case. If you, this is the PJM grid, by the way, if you procure enough solar to meet your annual demand at 100%, you're actually getting about 65% carbon-free electricity in this case. If you go all wind, you can do a little bit better because the wind is producing at night, although there's still some variation. And you can get around 90% or so in this example by putting together some mixture of wind, solar, and short duration storage. Going beyond 90% with short duration storage and just wind to solar is pretty tough. Folks who kind of model high decarbonized systems, I think, have found this again and again. Without some longer duration technology or dispatchable decarbonized solution, it can get pretty expensive with kind of today's lithium ion or short duration storage technologies. So here's another quick example of how a 24/7 CFE deal might look. It's similar to the previous diagram I showed, except that there's this additional layer provided by what we call a tracking provider, where you are procuring renewable energy resources through a PPA type contract. And in addition, now you have some data aggregator software provider that's pulling data streams, granular hourly data from your portfolio of 24/7 CFE resources. And they're also pulling in your hourly energy consumption data from your assets. And they're matching that for you throughout the year to give you a score or analysis around what level of carbon-free electricity you're achieving on an hourly basis as opposed to just an annual approach. And you can have targets specified in your 24/7 CFE contract or PPA. We've seen there's some deals that have been signed where consumer acquires a set of resources, and the independent power provider who's putting that portfolio together will maybe make a performance guarantee that will get to at least 80% or at least 90% CFE in any given year. And so you can have those targets around these deals as well. Here's some charts we put together showing just how hourly variation in carbon-free sources can really vary depending on where you are. These are all United States examples. I think you can put together some similar examples for Europe. This is 2022 data. And depending on what types of resources you're looking at, you can have pretty high levels of decarbonization today and with different types of profiles. So these systems are led, in this case, by Bonneville Power, Duke, and Tennessee Valley Authority because those existing systems have large shares of either hydro and or nuclear generation. So to some folks, that's fine. It's low carbon. Other folks might really want to be trying to push the needle a little bit more and make incremental change from their actions. So rather than maybe target things here, they might target another grid somewhere else where they can put more incremental renewables and have a bigger impact on the change. So these are all kind of things that I think energy users are thinking about as they develop their siting and procurement strategies. As part of this effort, we tried to track down as many of the 24/7 CFE deals as we could. We have a spreadsheet that kind of tracks all these and some of their key characteristics. Every time I take a week or two away from that, it becomes out of date pretty quickly. But as of last year, we found roughly 1.5 gigawatts of 24/7 CFE deals globally have been implemented. Here's a few examples of some of the larger ones. I mentioned these folks as some of the early drivers on the energy procurement side, or on the energy consumption side, excuse me. So Google has signed a deal with AES for 500 megawatts of 24/7 CFE at a 90% target for some of their data centers in Virginia and the eastern United States, and also have a short-term supply agreement with Engie in Germany for an 80% 24/7 CFE. Microsoft has signed deals with Constellation, Engie, and Vattenfall around the United States and Europe that include elements of hourly matching to track those things. And Iron Mountain has set up deals with a handful of their suppliers to match hourly renewable energy supply with consumption for their data center facilities around the northeastern United States. We're seeing regulated electric utilities also getting into the game. Google has a couple years ago, I think, or maybe a year ago, signed a deal with Nevada Energy to get 70% 24/7 CFE from a large new solar facility and a large new battery project for data centers in the Las Vegas area. This one I found a little interesting because there's a sharing agreement with the storage resource in this case, where I believe most of the time Google's using the battery for their energy matching strategy, but Nevada Energy retains the right to use the battery during stressful grid conditions so they can get some capacity service from it as well. Georgia Power Company has moved forward and achieved approval from their state regulators to develop a program they're calling carbon-free energy around the clock. Just a different name for very similar or the same thing. This is a smaller program, it's slower moving, but it's interesting because it's one of the first regulated program offerings in a more of a generic sense that's moving forward and getting regulatory approval. And I think what's interesting about that development is that once you have a program like that, customers of this utility, commercial industrial customers, can sign up for the existing terms. And so what that does is for folks who may not have full-time staff or teams of people to develop and negotiate their energy procurement strategies, I think it makes an around-the-clock or a 24/7 type approach possible to larger groups of perhaps smaller customers who are still looking for this sort of thing to move in their decarbonization strategies. I mentioned the federal government signed their executive order, which included a goal on 24/7 carbon-free energy. So they're now starting to develop agreements with utilities around the country where they have electricity consumption for their agency offices and laboratory facilities and other government facilities, and have signed MOUs with Entergy Arkansas in 2022, and then recently signed one with Xcel Energy in Colorado. These are still a little vague, they're not specific deals, but they're agreements to start work towards developing what 24/7 CFE procurement looks like for these particular customers or load centers. And then local governments, some have gotten into the mix. So these are 3 small to medium-sized cities on either coast of the United States, as well as Des Moines in the middle of the country, that have adopted city council resolutions with formal 24/7 CFE goals. I'm not sure exactly how they're working with the utility, or some of these might be municipal or community choice aggregations as well. But ostensibly, they're moving in this direction and will be, if they haven't already, will be getting 24/7 carbon-free energy in some way to meet their local government sustainability goals. And all 3 of these cities have joined the United Nations 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy Compact, indicating furthermore their interest in moving forward with this type of an approach. And I'm going to apologize because this is really all I have on this topic for all the folks here, but really what I call tracking providers, but really they're the data companies, the software platform developers and maintainers, I think have done a lot of work to develop solutions that really enable this to happen. So these include setting up the data pipelines from the supply to the consuming centers, and allowing the utilities and the suppliers to look at how well they're matching their supply with their consumption. And so tracking entities like the Mid-Continent Renewable Energy Tracking System have really moved forward from issuing renewable energy certificates that come in like monthly or quarterly batches without really much of a time dimension, to having hourly time attributes with their certificates, so that you can see where these sources of supply have come from, and also exactly when they've come from, to enable 24/7 or hourly matching in this way. And then on the bottom here are a handful, a non-exhaustive list of software companies that we talk to through this work, that are putting together. Although I'm sorry, I don't know if actually I formally connected with FlexiDAO, but I think my colleague might have. So I don't want to put names on here and say I've talked to everybody. But we've these folks are examples of people that are putting together data pipelines and tracking solutions that enable this to move forward. There's a handful of stakeholder initiatives for folks who kind of want to learn more or get more involved. World Resources Institute, Euroelectric have handfuls of webinars and networking opportunities for peer knowledge exchange. Princeton University and TU Berlin, who we saw in the previous panel, have put together some good modeling studies that have explicitly modeled full electricity systems with this type of procurement strategy implemented to study the impacts on optimal evolution of the whole system with this kind of behavior underlying the evolution of the electricity sector. And then finally, just a few insights that we list in our white paper review on this. I'm going to go through demand quickly because I think I mentioned a lot of this already. Thinking of this as an evolution in corporate energy procurement strategy, there's been a few early adopters of 24/7 CFE buyers, and folks we've talked to who aren't actively signing deals in this space suggest that there's a lot of folks that are keeping an eye on it or are interested and perhaps willing to move into this space once things mature or once a little more experience is gained. Very broadly speaking, beyond just data centers and tech companies, looking at hospitality, industrial manufacturing, automotive, large energy consumers like that. And we mentioned the United States government will be a large buyer of 24/7 CFE as it implements its goals as outlined in its recent executive order. We found that with respect to the regulatory environment, it's easier to develop new 24/7 CFE products and deals in deregulated power markets because independent power producers can more quickly develop customized offerings for corporate buyers in these environments, as opposed to in regulated areas, things like new resource procurements, customer tariffs, and program design that underline 24/7 CFE have a longer approval process and have to bring in handfuls of stakeholders and just kind of go through a lengthier regulatory approval. But as I mentioned, we still are seeing some regulated utilities moving forward in this space. Some potential challenges for 24/7 CFE that we identified. Talking to some of the early moving suppliers, we heard from them, a desire to implement this while maintaining competitive pricing can be a challenge as they get pushed to develop new projects that push the envelope on faster decarbonization beyond where the grid is going anyways, and doing that at the same price as the status quo electric supply can be a challenge. New projects specifically for 24/7 CFE, in addition to all of the renewables that are already getting developed, can be tough for them given that there's especially in the United States, I'm not sure the situation in Europe, very long interconnection queues that are delaying projects, broadly speaking. So pushing even more on this, it's not a reason to not do it, but it exacerbates some of these grid congestion issues that we're facing and kind of underlie the importance of need for additional infrastructure and thinking about how to effectively move these queues forward. And then some of the power suppliers expressed to us concerns about what they saw as financial and operating risks that they're bearing with some of these early deals. I think this might just come from early procurements with this kind of an approach where folks don't necessarily have a lot of experience. So they'll make guarantees of certain levels of carbon-free electricity on an hourly basis, and failure to meet those goals, I think, falls, gets hit with penalties or however those deals are negotiated, is something that may be of concern to them. Another potential challenge is this strategy called emissionality that some corporate energy buyers are interested in. And this is, in some ways, it can be thought of as potential competition to 24/7 CFE in that it's not focusing on closely matching energy consumption and supply. Rather, it's focused on having an energy consumer develop a procurement strategy that maximizes emissions reductions. So the thinking goes, climate change and carbon emissions are a global phenomenon. 24/7 CFE is really focused on hourly close matching on the same local grid where we have assets to more closely match our consumption with renewable energy supply. Emissionality is saying, no, we've got this kind of annual accounting paradigm that that is okay, and we can build renewables anywhere and still get credit for it for our renewable energy goals. And so we want to do it where we think it'll have the highest emissions impact for the globe. So I might be in a low carbon grid in the Pacific Northwest, for example. Rather than adding a new wind farm for my 24/7 there, I might build a new wind farm in North Dakota or something like that. Not where I'm consuming, but it'll have what they see as a bigger impact on decarbonization globally. And then I don't need to stress this for folks in the room, but ensuring data quality and just getting access to real-time granular supply and consumption data can be a challenge. Some folks, even large energy consumers, if they don't own their meter, they might not even have access to their own hourly consumption data. So getting beyond some of those barriers can slow things down. And that's all I have formally. So I know there's a lot of good perspectives in the room, so I'm open to discussion, and I'm also happy to take any questions or comments on what I've said so far. Thank you for your time. Yes, sir. Yep, go ahead.
There was a slide where you talked about Google and Microsoft. You didn't talk about AWS in this matter.
Yeah.
Is there any reason
Why I didn't mention AWS? The question is why I didn't mention AWS. As far as we know, they haven't been executing 24/7 carbon-free energy deals like Google and Microsoft have. So I didn't mention them.
Amazon is a clouding signatory of emissions first, which is an emissionality focus, not 24/7.
Did you have a question, Ben?
There's a great quote in Utility Dive, which is a U.S. industry, about that I've used a lot. I think this is the technology in this sphere and where we work in energy technology is moving at the speed of light, but our regulations and processes are still moving at the speed of lawyers. So what do you think? Like, we're stuck in the middle of this as a registry and a data provider. And what can we do to work with organizations like EPRI, Linux Energy Foundation, federal government to get things moving faster? It's a huge problem.
Yeah, I think you probably would have some unique insights into that as a former regulatory lawyer yourself. I don't know, I'm open to other perspectives in the room. At EPRI, I mentioned, our advisors and higher-ups are thinking about this as potentially a large game-changing development if large energy consumers, move into this space en masse, or this becomes kind of a standard or one of a few standard procurement approaches. And we think the utilities need to develop ways to track this for them. Not only increase their decarbonization, but just get the data and the infrastructure and the tracking put together so that they can offer a baseline. Otherwise, they're going to lose customers, big ones. So that's kind of, I think, how we're, a lot of folks at EPRI are thinking of this. We're putting together an initiative for our members. It's kind of one of the next steps. It's just kind of another opportunity to share best practices among a lot of program developers at various utilities, including a lot of regulated ones who might be thinking about this similar to kind of how Georgia Power has started moving forward. We're open to other ideas to do more technical research or other collaborative approaches that are helpful and useful. So.
Do you think the industry is open to is going to accept open source? The utility industry?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about open source. I mean, I think these types of tools can be implemented in various approaches. It depends. I mean, I think out in California, you're seeing some real adoption of open source for key decision making and planning, in some of the planning tools. I think it depends on having a good, well-maintained, accessible set of tools, regardless of whether it's through open source or commercial approaches. So, first up here and then down here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hey,
Hey, Toby.
Hey. Yeah, I have a question about essentially it's an issue that doesn't exist in Europe, but it's about the distinction between compliance recs and voluntary recs in the US, and to what extent compliance recs, which are used for utilities RPS programs, can be used toward consumers' claims on carbon emissions and their scope 2 essentially. There doesn't seem to be, it seems to be, depending on where you go and who you speak to in the US, there are different views on that kind of interaction between compliance recs and corporate claims. Does EPRI have a view on it? It's not specifically related to 24/7, but it definitely comes up in a lot of discussions relating to 24/7 about that role. Do you have, is it something you spend a lot of time looking at? Do you have a view?
I don't think we have a strong view on it, other than, I mean, we agree that there's kind of these two key use cases for RECs in the United States for different purposes: regulatory compliance and corporate goals. Those could go in a similar direction for 24/7 CFE to the extent entities with jurisdiction legislate or impose regulatory requirements for 24/7 CFE. Now you need a way to track that, similar to the RPS. And corporates are also doing these for voluntary purposes. So are we okay on time, or is it time to stop? Okay, sorry. Maybe we can follow up afterwards. I think we're already over. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your attention.